I'd like to introduce Richard Arthur, who is from Thompson's in Bristol and is our main authority on TUPE and even writes the books on TUPE. Is that good? We briefly had we're conscious of the fact that quite a lot of you in the room will have already gone to various TUPE lectures and seminars. So what we're going to do is Richard's going to give a brief overview of what TUPE is all about. But then he wants to really pick it up from the floor, and if you've got specific questions regarding TUPE, because we are conscious we've got people here from all three tranches, so you'll all be at various different stages. But to get the most out of the session for you, to ask Richard questions. So without further ado, Richard.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the legal position on TUPE, and I do endorse the situation that it seems to me best if we take a lot of questions and discuss those issues that come up, because that is perhaps the best way of understanding the way in which TUPE is going to operate in your particular individual circumstances. At the outset, I want to be absolutely clear in my message about TUPE, and that is that TUPE is not going to provide the answer to all of the difficulties that are thrown up by the transfers to LACCs. TUPE may provide some tools in your negotiating armoury, it may provide some additional resources which will be of use to you, but I certainly wouldn't want you to take the message away that TUPE will provide the answer to all of the difficulties that you face. It won't, and it's very important that we have that clearly at the front of our minds from the start. TUPE is a piece of law that derives from European Union law. It originally started applying in the private sector, but now it is of widespread application in the public sector. Broadly, what it does is it provides that where there is a transfer of an undertaking, or an operation, or a service from one employer to another, the starting point is that terms and conditions of employment, with the exception of pensions, are preserved. The easiest way to think about the way TUPE applies is to imagine your individual contract of employment. And what you do is you put the bid in pensions in square brackets because that's dealt with separately, and then you cross out the name of your fire service employer and you write in the name of the LACC. That's broadly how TUPE works at its simplest. There are then various protections which are incorporated into TUPE. For example, a dismissal by reason of a transfer is automatically an unfair dismissal. A dismissal which is connected with the transfer but is for an organisational, technical or organisational reason is a fair dismissal. And so the important message there is that TUPE does not actually prevent redundancies. TUPE does allow in certain limited circumstances for variations to terms and conditions of employment, where the reason for the variation is connected with the transfer and is for an economic, technical or organisational reason containing changes in the workforce. Now, all of those words are encrusted with quite detailed law, but the broad message to take is that these so-called ETO reasons for variations, because there will be changes in headcount and because there will be changes in job descriptions, will almost certainly be available. So where I started by saying that TUPE preserves terms and conditions of employment, it actually won't do in practice, because there are ETO reasons, there are opportunities to vary those terms and conditions of employment, and we already know that LACCs will take those up. In my view, perhaps the most important protection that is provided for in TUPE is the information and consultation obligations which are imposed on principally the fire and rescue service employers. This comes in two stages. Long enough before the transfer to enable consultation to take place, various categories of information have to be provided to the union. These include details of when the transfer is going to take place, but most importantly, they include the legal, economic and social implications for affected employees, the measures that the fire service employer is going to take in connection with affected employees, and the measures that the fire service employer envisages that the LACC will take in connection with the transfer. This word measures is key, and you will see it running through all of the information and consultation letters, and you would expect there to be a legal definition of what a measure is, and actually there isn't, and lawyers spend lots of time arguing over that. And the simplest way to look at it is to treat a measure as any change to existing working practices or arrangements. It may or may not be something in the contract of employment, it may be a policy, it may be just a practice that has developed in your particular workplace. But the long and the short of it is that if the FRS envisages measures, taking measures in relation to the transfer, it has to tell you about them. And if it envisages that the LACC will take measures after the transfer, then it also has to tell you about those. So that's the information side of the information and consultation obligation. There is then the consultation side. And this is weekly, it's not as strong as we'd like it to be. First of all, it's only an employer on the wording of TUPE that has to consult with you. Now, of course, in advance of the cutover, your employer is the Fire and Rescue Service, not the LACC. And so the traditional perception of TUPE on its wording is that the LACC is not under an obligation actually to consult in advance of the transfer. And that may well be right as a matter of law. It's not finally decided yet. But we push the argument and we say, actually, if you take a purposive and progressive approach to TUPE, the LACC should actually consult with you before the transfer, because if it doesn't, what's the point of TUPE? That's a very fair question. But it does seem to me that as we go through the TUPE process, and it's a very protracted process of information and consultation and seeing exactly what the arrangements are going to be, the information and consultation obligations are the part to focus on. They don't actually provide you with a right to a particular outcome, but they do provide a mechanism for you to get informed and consulted. And I do recommend that they're the most advantageous and useful part of TUPE for our purposes. That is the very briefest of overviews of the way in which TUPE works. It's important to have at the back of your mind the concept that what I'm talking about is affected employees. That's not just people who are actually going to transfer over to the LACC. It's not just the control staff. And I think there's a message in all of this that other employees, regular firefighters from the Fire and Rescue Service, can also be affected employees. And so they are people who also need to be informed and consulted about with the trade union.